Well, welcome everybody to this webinar of the ACT division of the Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering. We here are in the rooms of the FTSE offices in Canberra, and we have a gathering number who are joining online. Let us kick off first of all by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, and also those of our participants who are joining online. We pay respect to the traditional elders, to the new and emerging elders, and also recognise the knowledge base or bases that they have in relation to landscapes and this old continent on which we work. We'd like to acknowledge also any of the Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders who may be with us online today. So this is the, as you see, the pre-competitive geoscience webinar. It's a really hot, fast-moving, fast-evolving and developing topic. And it's also so important to Australia. Its importance to the low carbon economy and ultimately to sustainable development almost goes without saying. We have two fantastic speakers who can address this topic and inform us and later on take questions. First of all, Dr. James Johnston, Fellow of our Academy and also a committee member in ACT, who is CEO of Geoscience Australia, which is superbly placed as an organisation, and also James himself personally to speak to the topic. James has got extensive experience in public sector and also private sector, initially joining up with Geoscience around 2006, I think, but then the interaction between public and private sector, I think, is so important for the development of geosciences within Australia. Now, we have an apology from Alison Britt, who is not feeling at all well today. And she just came in with a very last minute apology. And we have the wonderful opportunity of Dr. Sarlae McAlpine, who is a colleague, and she is from the division of, I'll get to it in a moment.
Minerals, energy and groundwater.
Thank you, James. And she's senior advisor working in Australia, but also working, connecting internationally with Canada and the USA and Korea on these questions. So what will happen is that James will speak first, and then normally in these webinars, we then move on to the second speaker, to Sarlae, and after that, we'll move into the Q&A session. Now, for the Q&A session, Andy Shepherd, who has set this all up and is our events coordinator on the ACT committee, will then manage the Q&A. So if that's all perfect, and at that moment, Andy, you might like to come and sit up here.
So everybody just get at least one question in your head.
So, James, over to you.
Thank you very much, John, for that very kind and well-informed introduction. And in fact, the way we're going to run the show today is I will speak for 10 minutes or so. Sarlae will then take a middle portion and then throw back to me for the end, and then we'll get on to the Q&A. But look, it's a great pleasure to be here speaking to the Academy. And look, at Geoscience Australia, we think our purpose is to be one of the trusted advisors on earth sciences to inform decision-making for government, for industry and for the community at large. And through our geoscience programs, we're building Australia's resources wealth. That's how we like to frame it. And indeed securing Australia's water resources in terms of groundwater at least. Our science is on behalf of the government and it's for the public good. We call it pre-competitive science, and I'll I'll speak to what we actually mean by that shortly, but we call it that because it's at the earliest stage of information coming before private sector investment, but not instead of it. We're not competing with the private sector. As I mentioned, it informs decisions by government, communities and industry, and it creates a pipeline of projects that we're going to need to support Australia's transition to net zero, to grow the green economy and help sustainably manage our environment. So Sarlae and I will spend the next 45 minutes or so showing you that the road to net zero is actually through the resources sector, and that pre-competitive geoscience is crucial to decarbonising our economy. Before I dive in, I too would like to acknowledge that we're meeting on Ngunnawal country, home to Canberra as the nation's meeting place. And our organisation, Geoscience Australia, we work right across Australia, and we work with First Nations people on country across the nation. So we pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that they were Australia's first miners, mappers and navigators, things that are near and dear to our hearts. And that they have a deep and continuing connection to country. I extend that respect to any First Nations people who are here with us today or indeed online. And that satellite dish is actually our dish in Alice Springs. It's a partnership with the US, and there's a separate dish that has a US First Nations motif on it as well. So for those of you who are not familiar with Geoscience Australia, we're part of the Commonwealth Government, and we're based just down the way here in Simonston. And it's easy to think of us as a geological survey, but as you can see from the various impact areas on this slide, we do a lot more than map rocks. And we'll be discussing work related to the impact on the resources sector today, but those other impact areas could be great topics for future presentations. Within the organisation, about 80 of our 600 strong workforce are focused on this building Australia's resources wealth component. We recognise that our mineral, energy and groundwater resources are the lifeblood of the Australian economy. And we seek to empower land users and decision makers with the data and the information, the tools and indeed new thinking that will ensure Australia's resources future is sound, including in particular the critical minerals that Australia and our partner countries will need to transition to low carbon economies. And you can see just how crucial mineral and energy resources are to the Australian economy by the figures presented here. According to the Reserve Bank, the mining sector accounted for almost 15% of Australia's GDP last year. Meanwhile, the Department of Industry, Science and Resources indicates that more than 250,000 people were employed by the sector, bringing in $473 billion in export income, which is around 71% of total export income. Not only do our resources support the Australian economy, but they're vital to the global economy as well. For example, Australia is the world's largest producer of bauxite, which of course is used to make aluminium, and largest producer also of iron ore. We're also #1 producer of zircon and rutile, a titanium mineral, which provide the critical minerals of zirconium, our elements of zirconium and titanium, and we supply more than half the world's lithium. And that's been a very rapid increase actually from a low base not so many years ago. In fact, Australia is the leading producer of many more resource commodities, and Sarlae will speak to this a bit later on. So how does the government bolster the success of the mining sector to continue to attract the global capital that we need to develop the resource opportunities in Australia? This is where pre-competitive geoscience comes in. And it's an important driver in realising a low carbon economy. But what do we actually mean by that term pre-competitive geoscience? Generally speaking, it refers to collaborative research and other activities that focus on gathering baseline geoscience data and information to support land users such as mineral, petroleum or hydrogen explorers, but also land users in the agricultural sector too. And we deploy a range of geophysical techniques, geochemical techniques, and good old-fashioned geological mapping as well. Pre-competitive geoscience aims to lower the technical risk and cost for explorers so that we can attract investment into Australia to support evidence-based decision-making for sustainable resource development. You can think of it as developing a prospectus for potential mineral exploration investors into the country. And as I said before, it comes before commercial activity rather than instead of it. Also, as the slide shows, pre-competitive geoscience programs generally involve collaboration with others. They involve data acquisition, integration, sharing, and importantly, new thinking. That's where the real value add comes. When it comes to supporting the energy transition, our pre-competitive geoscience is supporting the development of the hydrogen industry, the green steel industry, carbon capture and storage as well within Australia. Our work is also supporting the discovery of critical minerals and the diversification of their supply chains, which is one of the critical drivers for a lot of the activity at the moment. And it's on this last topic that Sarlae and I will focus for the remainder of the presentation. So before we go any further, I'd like to just define what critical minerals are, because there's a lot of misconceptions around this and misunderstandings and in fact agendas out there about which commodities are critical minerals. And as you probably picked up, there are a lot of critical mineral lists, even among Australian states, let alone among different countries, and certainly specific companies. Every company would like their commodity of choice to be on that list. For the purposes of this talk, though, I'm referring to the Australian government definition, in which a critical mineral is a mineral, gas, or metal that is essential for our modern technologies, economies, or national security, but importantly, also has supply chains at risk of disruption. So this definition is consistent with the way the US defines critical minerals, and they're one of our key partners in this space. So first up, let's consider that image of native copper at the top of the slide. Some make the argument that the energy transition metals like copper and nickel should be critical minerals. But when the Australian list was last updated last year, these supply chains were considered pretty robust, so they're not really at risk of disruption. We go to pink diamonds. Well, they're the opposite. They're very rare to begin with, and since the Argyle mine closed down, they're even more so. But they're just not essential to the Australian economy. Whereas tantalum, the bottom example, is both essential for advanced technology and has potential market issues with supply dominated by the Congo and China. So you'll see it on the Australian critical minerals list and most other countries as well. There are more than 80 elements used in modern technologies, and while you could regard all of them as essential, they can't all be listed as critical, because then the term simply loses its meaning. So the key differentiator is that risk of disruption to supply chains. So here are the 26 commodities currently on the Australian critical minerals list. And we've also indicated by essentially mapping them to our geological potential to supply those here in Australia. It's a colour-coded red for high potential or orange for medium. And one of the really important things to know about the critical minerals, this terminology, is that they change over time, so that the transition to net zero will put copper, may well put copper and nickel supply chains under pressure, resulting in them joining the ranks of Australian critical minerals into the future. And as you may have seen, the Australian government has a process underway to update our critical minerals list, and that will be regularly updated. So just watch this space if you have an interest. And it's for this reason as well that Geoscience Australia, at Geoscience Australia, we are pretty much commodity agnostic in our approach to our science. It means that all of the data and the information and the tools and new thinking that we're developing in our geoscience programs can be applied to all commodities. We can pivot to whatever is the critical issue of the day. And indeed, critical minerals is an example of having done exactly that. 10 years ago, we were getting ourselves ready for this transition before it was being widely talked about, and now we are implementing those planned programs. So some of the things that impact on the ephemerality of what's critical when. This slide shows some of the current issues impacting global supply chains. So decarbonisation, of course, and the shift to battery storage and solar and wind and electric vehicles. We also have changing geopolitical landscapes and trade relationships, world events like the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, and also concentrated markets like China's dominance of rare earth elements and processing, and natural disasters, as well as just geological scarcity. All of these things can and will change. So Geoscience Australia seeks to ensure that we have the data and the information to pivot to new challenges in the future. And it's important to be able to pivot in this manner because when you've been, unless you've been hiding or living under a rock, you'd probably be quite familiar with the fact that a huge range of advanced technologies require critical minerals, from renewable energy infrastructure to electric vehicles to telecommunications, electronics, medicine and defence. Electric vehicles and wind turbines, for example, use lithium, cobalt, graphite, rare earth elements, along with the major metals like copper, nickel and aluminium. And while the increasing demand for electric vehicle batteries is well publicised, increasing demand for stationary battery storage, the kind that you would hook up at home to your solar panels, that's often overlooked. But they can also use lithium, but because they're stationary, you can afford to use heavier elements and utilise other technologies like vanadium redox flow batteries. All of this is adding up to a step change in global mineral demand. There are a range of forecasts about how much new material is going to be needed. And to be clear, it's got to be new material. There's not enough material in the system at this stage to have recycling make a significant impact. Some of the most accessible assessments are published by the International Energy Agency, and in their 2022 report on global supply chains just for EV batteries, they forecast that if countries are to meet their stated policies by 2030, then the world will need 41 new nickel mines, 30 new lithium mines and 11 new cobalt mines based on average production for these commodities. Under more ambitious scenarios of countries meeting their climate commitments and net zero targets on time and in full, then the number of new mines is even higher. So it's clear that to meet the critical mineral needs, Australia will need a pipeline of new supply coming online, being sustainably developed, creating diverse markets and sovereign capability. And to that end, the Australian government just recently released its critical mineral strategy just back in June. And it has 6 focus areas that you can see listed there, selected to grow Australia's critical minerals sector and provide an ongoing framework for government decision-making. And I recall at the time of the launch, Minister King was very clear that this is just setting up the framework and there will be more to come. It includes a focus on unlocking infrastructure investment, growing a skilled workforce in this sector, developing strategically important projects, attracting investment and building international partnerships, and we're certainly squarely in that mix, particularly with the US and Canada. Ensuring social outcomes as well, particularly for First Nations and regional communities, and promoting our environmental, social and governance leadership, commonly referred to simply as ESG. Each of these objectives is underpinned by Australia's extraordinary geological endowment and potential for new discovery, our world-leading mining industry and the foundations of pre-competitive geoscience, government-based geoscience. So I'm now going to hand over to Sarlae to talk about Australia's critical minerals endowment and Geoscience Australia's foundational pre-competitive geoscience that is supporting this strategy. So over to you, Sarlae.
Right, so to continue the theme of growing demand for minerals, this example from the World Bank shows 17 different elements are needed for clean energy technologies. The ones highlighted are the Australian critical minerals in red, top there. And as you've heard from James, a staggering amount of these minerals are going to be needed to meet coming demand. So for example, a typical EV battery requires around 185 kilos of minerals, and to meet government declared EV ambitions, battery mineral supply chains will have to expand tenfold by 2030. So 2030, as a reminder, is only 7 years away. So it begs the obvious question of where are we going to get all of these minerals from? So to partially answer that, we can see that Australia is already producing many of the minerals needed for decarbonisation. James already showed you that we are the world's leading supplier of lithium, iron ore, zircon, bauxite and rutile. And while Australia has a smaller share of global production for other energy minerals, such as manganese, rare earths, nickel and silver, this chart still demonstrates that we play an important role in ensuring diverse supply chains. When it comes to Australia's share of global resources, we are in an even more enviable position, with some 21 mineral commodities ranking in the top 5. However, there is a mismatch between production and resources, as many Australian deposits are not yet developed, which speaks again to Australia's potential to supply critical minerals, as well as our need to attract investment into the sector. So delving into this potential to supply a little bit more, Geoscience Australia has counted some 354 mines and deposits around the country that contain critical mineral resource estimates, of which some 70% or 252 deposits are undeveloped. So these resource estimates cover nearly the entire list of Australia's critical minerals, with only the exception of beryllium and germanium. And in addition to the undeveloped deposits, we also have 49 operating mines, 37 mines under development, another 16 on care and maintenance that also host these critical mineral resources. So you'll note that I'm not calling these critical mineral mines as such, because some of them, while containing a resource estimate, don't necessarily produce these minerals. So for example, Mount Isa used to produce cobalt along with its copper, but has not done so for many years. And the rare earth resource at Olympic Dam remains uneconomic. We've covered resources, but what are we producing? What is coming down Australia's critical minerals pipeline? Our critical minerals production is dominated by titanium and zirconium, associated with mineral sand deposits, and also lithium, silica sands, and cobalt from Western Australia's nickel mines. In addition, we produce antimony, bismuth, tungsten, and for now helium. The platinum group elements in bismuth have question marks next to them on this image because it's not public from which mines they are produced, although we do know that the bismuth comes from Neostar's zinc smelting operations. We also think we must be producing niobium as a byproduct to lithium mining, but it's not reported in a way that enables us to capture this data. So we're not producing chromium, graphite, hafnium, rhenium, scandium, and vanadium, but we do have published resources in these. So I think it's safe to say we're not producing them yet. So it's also very important to look what's coming down the pipeline. And at a very early stage, our data shows 44 maiden mineral resource estimates were announced last year, of which 19 contained critical minerals. All right, this slide is quite interesting because it shows how Australia's geological endowment and mineral potential matches up against the 50 commodities on the US critical minerals list. The minerals with the tick next to them in the green circles there, they are also included in Australia's critical minerals list. And you can see there's a lot of overlap. The red circles, which James pointed out, show where we have high geological potential in Australia. And you can see that they cover some 70% of the US list. In fact, if you combine the high and moderate geological potential, we, Australia, could supply about 95% of the critical minerals to the United States. Similarly, this is the EU critical minerals list. They call them raw materials. In fact, if you combine our high and moderate geological potential here as well, we could also supply about 95% of critical minerals to both of these strategic partners. It's a similar story for other key international partnerships, such as Japan, India, and Korea. Huge investment and the right government strategies are also needed if we are going to bring on additional responsibly sourced Australian supply. So next I'm going to briefly cover some of the Australian government's resource and development activities and pre-competitive geoscience, which is the theme of today, that's designed to ensure that we can make the most of our critical mineral resources and that those very first links in the supply chain remain strong in the future. An interesting thing about critical minerals is that they force us to look at geology and resources in a new way. For example, the sample on the left shows quartz and molybdenite. So in the past, we would have declared that the shiny mineral is good and the quartz is uninteresting. But the world of critical minerals is different. Last year, silicon and high purity alumina were added to Australia's critical mineral list in recognition of their strategic importance and that vulnerability to supply. Silicon is a vital component in solar panel manufacturing and other applications such as semiconductors. To get silicon, you need quartz, and it turns out that we're going to need quite a lot of it. The CSIRO graph on the right shows projections for just solar applications, nothing else. So in order to meet these requirements for silicon and its products by 2050, quartz production is going to need to increase an extraordinary 40-fold on 2021 levels. And it can't be any old quartz. It must be high purity quartz, more than 99% silica. So we need to look at the geological controls on high-grade quartz deposits and need to look for new patterns and look at familiar things in new ways. But the challenge is huge. No one organisation or group can solve this alone. We need to pull together as a nation, harnessing our research strengths. So Geoscience Australia does this with critical minerals expertise and intellect with our colleagues at CSIRO and ANSTO. These science organisations, together with our policy arm at the Critical Minerals Office in the Department of Industry, Science and Resources, have created the Australian Critical Minerals Research and Development Hub. So the hub is largely focused on clean energy minerals to help Australia and like-minded countries achieve net zero. So the hub commences this year and is initially working on 3 important projects, and these will provide a foundation for its work going forward. There's a high purity alumina project being led by the CSIRO. ANSTO and Geoscience Australia are working on a high purity silica project together. And the map here actually shows a preliminary assessment of deposits with suitable feedstock for that high purity silica. And the third project is a criticality assessment for Australia, which recognises that we are mainly an export nation, but want to increase our sovereign capabilities. So GA is developing objective methodology to assess criticality, to assess the extent to which Australia's mineral import and exports are vulnerable to disruption and critical to Australia's sovereign interests. We want to understand from an Australian perspective which minerals are critical to us domestically and which of our exports are critical to both us and others and to what degree. So we also recognise that this huge challenge of developing diverse critical mineral supply chains won't be solved by Australia alone. The role of international partnerships is crucial, and we are involved in a number of initiatives, including the support of bilateral and multilateral cooperation with strategic partners. These activities also include investment attraction both with Austrade and under the banner of Australian Minerals, critical minerals standard development, and government science collaboration, which can be tremendously powerful when nations have aligned objectives. For example, we have the Critical Minerals Mapping Initiative, formed in late 2019 by Geoscience Australia and the Geological Surveys of Canada and the USA, to identify new critical mineral potential in all 3 of our countries. So while we're thinking about international relations, it's important to realise that Australia is not the only country vying to become the go-to destination for critical minerals investment. Other countries also offer low-risk operating environments, or great geology, or sometimes both. What makes Australia different? I want you to look at our critical minerals map on the screen here and notice the sheer diversity of critical commodities found here. Unsurprisingly, Western Australia dominates, but a key takeaway from this data is that each jurisdiction in Australia has massive potential for developing its critical mineral resources further. And this is very important for strengthening our sovereign capability nationwide. The next thing I want you to notice are the gaps. Vast tracts of the country are devoid of deposits, and this is not because they're non-existent, but because much of the continent is covered by thick sediment. So you can see this sedimentary cover represented by the yellows on this image. And the grey scale, if you can see it below, represents the magnetic character of the continent. So if you look in an area such as Mount Isa, you can see that the rocks that host the Mount Isa ore body extend beneath the cover. So we're estimating that some 80% of the country is still underexplored, with more mineral deposits still to be found within and buried under this sedimentary cover. So just for fun, here is a comparison of known critical mineral deposits, 354 of them, to the land area of each Australian jurisdiction. So congratulations, Tasmania, you're punching above your weight. It really pops out compared to the other states. And it reflects the fact that Tasmania has a lot more rocks to kick. They're at the surface, and it speaks to the potential of the rest of the nation if it is indeed covered by sediment and has those respective rocks. So to that end, we have some unique challenges in Australia that require investment into government-funded geoscience programs that provide this pre-competitive data and information to be able to look beneath the cover, amongst other challenges. So the federal government's flagship program is Exploring for the Future, led by Geoscience Australia in collaboration with our state and territory partners. It is a $225 million investment over 8 years, focused on revealing Australia's mineral, energy and groundwater potential, and by characterising that subsurface geology to lower exploration risk in new regions. So nationally, we're undertaking a significant expansion of data acquisition projects. These include deep earth geophysics, such as magnetotellurics, passive seismic, deep reflection seismic. Closer to the surface, we've been gathering gravity, magnetics, more seismic, airborne electromagnetics, and undertaking stratigraphic drilling. All of this work is underpinned by cutting-edge methodology, new coding, machine learning, reprocessing of all data. There are too many projects to describe today, so you will be relieved that I'm just going to show a few examples of our work, starting with this extraordinary image. This shows the world's largest airborne electromagnetic survey. I won't get into the weeds and how it works, but the important thing to understand is that it's based on electrical conductivity. Blue areas are where the Earth is resistive to an electrical current, red areas are conductive, indicating the presence of materials like sulfides and salt. So it's an important step towards a national geological framework. Much of the data and modelling has already been released publicly, stimulating tenement uptake by industry based on the new imaging of the subsurface that this data provides. I hope you'll agree it's a thing of beauty. And it has real-world practicality. In Western Australia, Geoscience Australia collaborated with the Geological Survey to fly the electro-airborne magnetic coverage of that state. OD6 Minerals Limited, which is a rare earths mineral explorer, with ground just out of Esperance, outlined in the red square on the picture of Australia there, used this data to be able to help them target the right kind of strata for clay-hosted rare earth elements, the sort that they have in China. They asked CSIRO to reprocess the flight line data, seen in the bottom section here, which shows high conductivity in red between two outcropping areas of low conductivity in blue. The resulting interpretation, seen in the top section, delineated a target clay horizon next to the rare earth bearing and rare earth shedding granite source rocks for this company to explore. So very promising drilling and results are coming from this clay horizon. And just a few weeks ago, they did release a maiden resource for their Splinter project. So the project is relatively low grade compared to the hard rock deposits like Mount Weld, for example, if you're familiar with those. But it's typical for this ionic clay-hosted rare earth deposit, which is more easily and cheaply processed. So that's an interesting thing to follow in the future. One of the common threads throughout the Exploring for the Future program is a systems approach, which seeks to understand and characterise how Earth's different layers influence when, where, and how or what is formed, and how other resources are formed. It is supported by a treasure box of data lakes that helps land users in Australia to make informed and data-driven decisions. So Geoscience Australia collects data from the deep earth to the surface, and we're really testing the limits of our modern technologies on the earth beneath us. It is hard to imagine any mineral exploration in Australia that is not underpinned by Geoscience Australia's national coverages of all of these data sets, particularly gravity, radiometrics and magnetics. They have served the nation well when combined together and with other data sets, and we can start to make some very powerful predictions. So in this case, the map on the left is a prediction of where magmatic hosted nickel, copper and platinum group mineralisation might occur, with the red being the most prospective areas. So it's based on our understanding of what geological ingredients are needed to create such a deposit. And then we use the geological maps and data sets to predict the best combination of where these ingredients are likely to coincide. So known nickel deposits were not included in this assessment, so we could test it. And so the mineralisation would not skew the results. So the resulting hotspots don't necessarily predict a deposit, but they can and do guide exploration activity into areas that are more likely to lead to discovery. The circle on the map in Western Australia, just outside of Perth, was the catalyst for Chalice Mining to explore this area for nickel copper PGE mineralisation. And this is where they discovered the Gonneville deposit at their Julimar project. This world-class discovery was the first of its kind in over 20 years, and it has also stimulated new tenement uptake and exploration expenditure in and around the Perth region. But large discoveries by themselves are not enough. They need to be in the right place and need to be economical. To that end, we also have a public tool called Economic Fairways that combines large-scale infrastructure and geological data sets to evaluate mining, processing, administrative and infrastructure expenses of mining operations across Australia. So on the left, you can see the overlay of that mineral, that nickel potential map with mining costs, depth of cover, transport, energy and royalties determine a rapid high-level spatial estimate of economic viability. With red being positive, just to keep you on your toes, and blue being negative in this image. So it allows economic considerations to be brought in much earlier for those initial stages of exploration. On the right, you can see some other modules available under development, phosphates, nickels, lead, and these often include those critical mineral byproducts in some cases. I'd now like to discuss a few points about the environmental and social governance responsibilities, the ESG that James mentioned. I asked earlier what made Australia different from other countries. As well as being an amazing geological country with significant prospectivity for new resources and wide-ranging government support for the mining industry as a whole, we can also build on solid foundations when it comes to ESG. And by solid foundations, I mean that ESG considerations are largely already built into our legislation, regulations and policies. The slide shows a few examples, and I'm sure there are others. And for instance, we are particularly strong in governance with a world-class resource reporting code, well-regulated banks, and compliance bodies with teeth. So I think we have a strategic opportunity to be more influential over the development of critical mineral standards that are pertinent to the Australian interests through bodies such as ISO, the International Organisation for Standardisation. This strong foundation provides us with a head start on most of the world. and it should enable us to springboard to the next level when it comes to sustainably and responsibly developing our critical minerals sector. So, what next? Well, that is probably another talk or series of talks altogether on ESG. But as you can see from the range examples on this slide, we could talk about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, international standards development, traceability, and the circular economy. So I'm going to choose one, and that's recycling as an example of where to next for Australia. And not recycling on bin night, but mine waste recycling. So as a part of the Exploring for the Future program, we are undertaking a national mine waste assessment in partnership with UQ, RMIT and Monash universities, as well as the state and territory geological surveys. So as a leading global mineral supplier, Australia has hundreds of active and historic mines and processing operations, all with associated waste storage, which could contain significant amounts of critical minerals. So by using geoscience modelling and understanding geochemical correlations, we aim to predict site-specific critical mineral prospectivity. And by integrating that economic modelling I showed you, this work will support the development of Australia's reprocessing capabilities, both for extraction and modern management of mine waste. So my way of understanding the challenge is to break it up into three questions. Where is our mine waste? What is in it? And is it viable economically, environmentally, and socially to reprocess? To answer the first question, we launched the Atlas of Australian Mine Waste in May this year. It provides accurate geospatial and operational information about mine and processing sites for more than 1,400 sites across Australia, and it would have to be the most comprehensive of its kind anywhere in the world. We will continue to add information in the next phase of development. To answer the second question about what is in our mine waste, we partner with the University of Queensland, RMIT, with support from the state and surveys again, to be able to undertake a sampling campaign across the country. And we are committed to funding as many as 19 sites, complementing the state-funded programs shown on this graph. So to date, more than 90 sites across Australia are about to kick off. So as the Exploring for the Future program enters its final year, our focus is now shifting to include the third question on the slide, namely the viability of reprocessing. So this will include the assessment of potential environmental, social and governance outcomes, as well as legislative considerations, but it is basic economic modelling. The combination of mineral grade and character with ore body tonnage that will be fundamental to determining which mine waste sites could be reprocessed for critical minerals. To this end, we have partnered again with Monash Uni to develop a spatial and volumetric assessment of mine waste storage facilities using satellite data. So it started with tailings dams, and here you can see some initial and promising results. This method has successfully segmented the tailings dam and seepage around the dam from the surrounding landscape. Some of the next steps are to handle errors introduced through cloud cover and to distinguish the seepage from the dam contents. But that's a story for another day. I'm now going to hand you back to James for some final slides demonstrating the impact of pre-competitive geoscience to Australia.
Thanks, Sarlae, and conscious that we're chewing up time, I'll try and go a bit faster through the last few. What I want to highlight is the impact that pre-competitive geoscience is having for Australia. And this slide is showing global mineral exploration expenditure over roughly the last 50 years. And it's levelised dollars, it's all adjusted for inflation. And it's colour-coded by the regions of the globe in which that expenditure was incurred. And you can see that now the mineral expenditure globally is around twice the level it was in the 80s and 90s, but nowhere near the amount it was in the 2012 peak. And arguably, it's very important that the current rate of expenditure increases. And Australia is represented there in that dark blue colour at the bottom. But so whereas I'm saying that we probably need a lot more exploration globally, it's not all doom and gloom as far as Australia is concerned. And I'd like to highlight that here. This is the same data but represented as percentages of that global capital being expended in given regions. And back in about 1993, we hit a peak of 23% of global exploration expenditure here in Australia. But then there was a steady decline year on year through to about 2015. And essentially Australia was being regarded by the exploration industry as mature and a place where the potential had already been tested. Essentially what that reflected was people were saying that the bits that outcrop had been well explored. And so in 2014 or so, there was a coalition of the willing, CSIRO, ourselves, various universities and some industry have put together a thing called the Uncover Roadmap. And it focused the efforts, I should say, on the state geological surveys and my own organisation with our Exploring for the Future program on unlocking the opportunities that lie at depth. And when we talk about uncover, Sarlae mentioned the cover that the sediments that cover Australia. You only need imagine a flight across Australia from either here to Darwin or here to Perth, and the flat farmland, and depending where you are, the red sand that covers vast expanses of the country. And all of the bedrock beneath that has some level of potential that, in large measure, is untested. So we set about addressing how to see through that cover in earnest in about 2016 with Exploring for the Future. And you can see the impact it's had on attracting global exploration funds to Australia. And now we're sitting at about 18%. And we aim to keep it going higher because USA and Canada recognise this success and are very keen to overhaul us. So, government-funded pre-competitive science has also stimulated exploration activity right across the country, and you can see that on the map here. This is showing tenements taken up for exploration since 2016. And this incorporates the decisions made by companies using Geoscience Australia's legacy data, and also incorporates new exploration frontiers opened up through the Exploring for the Future program. So we track the impact of pre-competitive geoscience by directly asking the companies, have you used this in your ground selection? And all up, we've counted 110 companies that have used our pre-competitive work in their selection of exploration tenements. And what you see there in terms of aerial extent covers more than 300,000 square kilometres. A lot of this activity is targeting critical minerals, and they're shown in green on this slide. And you'll see the concentration of tenements in southwestern Western Australia sparked by the Julimar discovery that Sarlae mentioned. And also a large area in the Northern Territory and Western Queensland, which is the result of opening up the Mount Isa to Tennant Creek frontier in the first phase of our Exploring for the Future program. So despite all of that activity, there are still vast areas of Australia that are underexplored, and there's plenty of opportunity for that next big discovery. Which leads to the obvious question, has Australia's pre-competitive geoscience resulted in discoveries? And the short answer is yes, it has, but we need to unpack that a little. If we look here at the leading global discoveries since 2017, which is the year after the Exploring for the Future program began and 2 years after the Uncover Roadmap was published, there have been 31 major mineral discoveries around the world since 2017, of which 8 are in Australia. And these are discoveries with an estimated net present day value of over $200 million US. Commonly referred to as Tier 1 and Tier 2 discoveries. 12 of those discoveries might not have happened if it were not for pre-competitive data. And in Australia, 6 of our top 8 discoveries were underpinned by pre-competitive geoscience. Interestingly, they were all in what we call greenfield areas, in other words, new exploration frontiers. And this is significant because their discovery opens up whole new provinces that are likely to host other mineral deposits after that first wave of exploration. So that we've opened up new exploration frontiers in Australia, and you can see that on this slide, showing those 12 global mineral discoveries from a previous slide that were underpinned by pre-competitive geoscience. And the first thing that I'd like to point out is the depth of discovery you can see in that second column from the right in Australia compared to the rest of the world. So our strategy to explore in and beneath extensive sedimentary cover is working. The second thing to note is that while there is a bias to gold and copper discovery, reflecting exploration expenditure for those relatively popular commodities, I'll call them, Australian pre-competitive geoscience has also supported discovery of ore bodies across a wide range of different mineral systems. And lastly, most of the mineral discoveries used more than one pre-competitive geoscience dataset. So these included geophysics, geochemistry, ore genesis modelling, and also our legacy data, showing the value of multidisciplinary studies and value-added science products, as well as the long-term custodianship of legacy exploration information by the government-funded geological surveys. That's one of the key features that plays in Australia's favour. These discoveries are very clear evidence that government investment in pre-competitive geoscience and analysis has translated into mineral discovery success. And while Australia's pre-competitive geoscience is only one part of the equation for resourcing net zero, it's delivering a big step change in discoveries at the same time as providing significant returns to Australia and Australians. To illustrate this last point further, Geoscience Australia commissioned Deloitte to quantify the value of pre-competitive geoscience to the Australian economy. The economic modelling in that study is based on a conservative assessment that 80 to 90% of the resources industry in Australia uses pre-competitive geoscience produced by Commonwealth and state geological surveys when they do their exploration. And we've reached this number through systematic industry engagement over the past 3 years. And noting that it takes time for new data sets to be used in private sector exploration, and that the average length of time from discovery to mining is around 15 years, Deloitte assessed government pre-competitive geoscience to have supported a direct economic contribution in 21-22 of $5.5 billion of direct value added and over 24,000 full-time jobs in exploration and mining support services, and $70.5 billion of direct value added and over 55,000 full-time equivalent jobs in minerals and oil and gas extraction. The study highlights that pre-competitive data and analysis provides a foundation for economic activity in downstream exploration and extraction industries worth over 1,000 times the original expenditure, which is a pretty remarkable result, really. So if you'd like to peruse that Deloitte report, you can see the link there, and I can come back to it later if need be. It was launched by Minister King yesterday, and you can find it at that web address. Perhaps most importantly, the value of pre-competitive geoscience extends beyond the monetary measures. It provides opportunities for government to partner with First Nations and regional communities. By working directly with landowners and other local people, we support their land use planning, highlight new opportunities, and empower negotiations through increased understanding of the resource potential of their country. We can build trust, and we can gain social license. We can change perceptions of the valuable role our geology plays and will continue to play in a positive net zero future for all Australians. And it's with this lens we also have an opportunity to attract the next generation of geoscientists into the sector, into geoscience and resources sectors more broadly. And I feel strongly that government geoscience offers people a safe, equitable and inclusive workplace and meaningful career opportunities, working on things that make a difference to national and global challenges. To conclude then, in meeting our net zero targets, we need all of the tools at our disposal And pre-competitive geoscience is one of the most important. It's the first link in that decarbonisation supply chain. It's providing positive returns on investment, as I've shown, from the early stages of exploration right through to resource extraction. And it provides a wide range of benefits to multiple stakeholder groups. The urgency of moving towards a low carbon economy means we have to move rapidly to bring on new supply of critical minerals, because not doing so is going to slow down our transition to net zero. Our success is going to require a whole of government approach where we proactively bring our collective leadership, innovation and capability to bear. At Geoscience Australia, we're proud to lead the pre-competitive geoscience that underpins Australia's actions to realise our national and our international goals of a low carbon economy. I thank you for the attention you provided today, and we'd be very happy to answer some questions.
Well, thanks, James and Sarlae. That was fascinating talk. I certainly got a huge amount out of it. Way more questions than we have time for you to answer, I'm sure. And I'm still gobsmacked as to why the Australian dollar is so low, given how much wealth we have in this country. But anyway, in the few minutes we have left, because unfortunately we don't have that many minutes, I will open it to the floor for questions, if I may. Maybe I'll try online first, seeing as they've been patiently waiting. So please, there's a written question. What is the ratio of products purchased by Australians using critical minerals that are manufactured in Australia? Is that a question you can...
I can't answer it factually, but I can take a stab at it just by observation that any of us could make. We all use mobile phones, we all have smart TVs, we all have a vast range of high-tech gear that is manufactured from these critical minerals. And unless I'm mistaken, I don't know of any manufacturer of those sorts of manufactured commodities within Australia. So the ratio would be extremely low. However, their government does have an agenda now to take our success in finding minerals further downstream to vertically integrated industries. So certainly to mineral processing in a way that we haven't in the past, and ultimately into advanced manufacturing as well. So the thinking is there, but the actuality it's not as yet.
Thanks, James. That was one of my questions too. Any other questions from our online participants? Please turn your mic on and go for it. Okay, I'll assume not, and we'll ask the room. Questions from the room. Sue.
So, fantastic presentation,
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating. I have two questions. One which I think, Andy, you were thinking of picking up on as well. You hinted at the value-added capture aspect of things. Clearly, we're under such pressure to increase production. The temptation will be to dig deeper and faster and ship it out, as opposed to capturing the benefit for Australia. So I'd invite you as a chance to expand on that a bit more. But I had another sort of minor question. It's fantastic to see the impact that Uncover has had on investment already. I mean, that's a really short time frame to see that. And then the work that obviously has been taken on from there. I noticed the list of new discoveries that you listed there, and the relatively large number in Australia, but they were all proportionately much deeper than the ones that were in other countries. Does that mean that it may not translate into economically useful deposits compared to the extraction in other countries, perhaps? So that's a really minor one. The other one's a bit of a macro. Yeah.
No, I'll go to the second one first. The list was actually deposits that are demonstrated to be economic, so notwithstanding the depth. And what you're witnessing there with the contrast in depth is just an impact, not an artifact, of Australia's geology itself, the fact that we have that cover. There are other continents that have been, I'll say, blessed for the time being with a relatively recent glaciation, wiping all of the dirt off the top. We have to learn to see through that cover, and we're being successful at that. And if we don't do that, we can't compete. But you are right that the deeper you go, it is more of an impediment to the economics of the project. But the ones we showed have demonstrated themselves to be economic, and they're proceeding. The first part of the question was, sorry.
Well, in terms of the temptation to just dig deeper and ship faster and not capture, I mean.
So the temptation to dig deeper, ship faster is a question for individual companies. There is government policy pushing us towards and creating an environment whereby it becomes more attractive for value-added industries to be onshore. We all got a shock, I guess, on many fronts, not just in the resources sector, during the pandemic about disruptions to supply chains and the need for sovereign capability, and that's not wasted on this government. So I can't speak to exactly how that will manifest in this sector, except I do know that we are seeing mineral processing capabilities for rare earth elements that used to previously be just shipped off as a concentrate to other countries that perhaps have lower environmental standards in terms of how they're going to process them. So that's already happening, particularly with mineral sands. And then, as I indicated, there's a policy towards stimulating advanced manufacturing. We've yet to see that play out.
May I?
Yes, please.
So one thing I spoke of is the mineral criticality assessment. So currently our critical minerals list in Australia is focused on our partners and what they need and what we have the ability to supply. Where we're moving in the future is being able to objectively determine what Australia needs. And I think as we understand our vulnerabilities and opportunity for increase in sovereign capability, there will be able to be evidence-based decisions made to invest in those areas to secure domestically further down that value chain. So I think it's certainly the direction, as James says, that we're moving. And we're providing the evidence to support the decisions that can be made.
Thank you. We are over time, or at time, so maybe one final question.
Great talk from a great organisation. Somewhat marginal, but at the same time that we're seeing this tremendous impetus and so on, we see just about every university closing down geology departments. And this is a major concern. I mean, you're not going to get that feeder of people. So what is the role, if any, of Geoscience Australia when it comes to universities and research?
That's a great question, Peter. So we've been lobbied by various universities to do whatever we can to help in that arena. And I had to start having a bit of a critical think about how does this work? And essentially, university courses are made available if there are interested candidates. You know, it's a sort of bums on seats thing. Now, that's not to fob it off. It means that the question has to be, how do we make this industry attractive to young folks to come into the sector? And I was puzzled over that for a time because at the moment, every person between, I don't know, age 10 and 25 is absolutely critically interested in the environment. However, I recently attended the World Mining Congress in Brisbane, and with the agenda that we've spoken about today, Minerals for a Clean Energy Future, we have the opportunity to brand the resources sector as part of the solution. And you will be doing a good thing for the planet if you skill up in understanding how to find the minerals that we're going to need for, just pick one, electric vehicles. And so this is in fact a green activity. That's kind of where we're at the moment, but so a role for GA would be to promote that narrative. We can't directly influence whether universities put on a course or not, being part of that discussion. Any insights there, Sarlae?
Only to add that you're correct that we need a value proposition. It's not enough these days just to be desperately interested in rocks. You know, you also need to be able to be doing something good. Yeah. And I studied rocks because I was in the desperately interested category. But I do think what Geoscience Australia can do is demonstrate that value proposition, which I think is the hook that is needed. And there are so many ways to contribute to a sustainable future. And I think if we can make it very clear that we're part of that, then we're on the right track.
Excellent, thank you. And I thought we'd learned from Utopia that government agencies didn't have to worry about ESG.
Still hasn't caught up with that.
Yeah, you have to watch it, James. It's a classic. Anyway, thanks everybody for coming, and for those attending online. It was a really exciting episode. I think we could go on for another hour, but some of us have got jobs we've got to go back to. But yeah, really appreciate your valuable time and presenting that in such a really interesting and appealing way. So thank you. Thank you.